Hey, would you look at that? Tuesday came around once again. So coming up on Worlds Asunder.
So, it's a whole thing.
What? Whole thing?
It's a whole thing, always. Alright, let me know when you're ready to start.
As storytellers, we want to capture the hearts, minds, and imaginations of our readers, mainly through our expertly crafted worlds.
Creating new worlds in any genre might seem like a daunting task, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel for every story.
Welcome, weary writers, to Worlds Asunder, a world-building and writer's life podcast.
My co-host is David Shadoin, better known as Shady. It's not just a descriptor, it's also his moniker.
And she's H.Y. Gregor, or you can call her Haley, your friendly post-apocalyptic wasteland elf.
Together, we've got enough published to fill a small shelf, but why should you listen to us? Because we called in some favors.
Every other week, we bring you the best and brightest to give you the tips and tricks on world building and character building like the pros. So, open up your ear holes.
Get out your pen and paper.
And get ready for us to tear Worlds Asunder. We're pulling out one from the archives, and we're bringing back the main historian. Yeah, that's right, Steve Ruskin himself. Listen up.
Do it. I'm here with Shady and Haley.
Shady just had to check his hair.
Intro.
He's very pretty.
I do.
He's ready.
I gotta make sure I match this guy's hair. Welcome back to Worlds Asunder. The only podcast that also is the only author podcast giving you world building and sponsored by L'Oreal.
Because Steve has more hair than both of us put together.
All right, that's it. I'm done.
How do you lose a guest in 3 seconds? You don't tell them what the intro is going to be. I am, as always, one of your co-hosts, Shady David Shadoin. It's both a descriptor and a moniker. And joining me, as always, is Haley H.Y. Gregor, or Sour Patch, or whatever her new bit's going to be.
Someday.
Today, we have the distinct honor of being able to, one, record in person with this really awesome guest that we have, but also just having him as one of the authors that's going to talk about world building with us. So we're gonna go through some of the stuff that I'm about to mention on his bio, but he writes science fiction, alternate history, and thrillers. He's also an award-winning historian with a PhD in the history of science, and has written numerous nonfiction books and articles, including the #1 Amazon bestseller, America's First Great Eclipse. A Colorado native, Steve, he has been a university professor, a mountain bike guide, and a number of things in between. You can find him at his website using his name. Our guest today, Steve Ruskin. Steve, welcome.
Thanks.
To Worlds Asunder.
It's good to be here.
Yeah.
As always.
Are you sure?
Well,
you sound like you're
it's
regretting
good to
it
be in your dining room, as always. So
Oh yeah, live.
it's good to be here on
Live
Worlds
from
Asunder as
underground.
well for the first time. So
Yeah.
There you go. Well, so Steve, we did ask you here, as much as we've spent some time catching up and having a bit of fun. We did ask you here to talk world building. You are going to be the first author we've had on that has a numerous selection of nonfiction books that you had previously written, including the #1 Amazon bestseller. Would you say, when you write nonfiction, that you do have to still do a bit of kind of like the world building aspect of things?
Oh, sure. So my nonfiction, for those who don't know, even though you kind of mentioned, I'm a historian. I have a PhD in history of science, but I'm not really active anymore as an academic, which is nice. I kind of enjoy fiction a lot more. But so I wrote history for many years, like academic and popular history, like America's First Great Eclipse I wrote in 2017, which was a sort of a history of the eclipse of 1878, which was to coincide, I wrote the book to coincide with that eclipse in 2017, and then it did well again this last April 2024 with the eclipse we had. So, yes, when you write history, especially non-academic, academic history can be pretty dry. Popular history, you want to set the stage, right? You want to talk about the background and the setting, kind of like you do in fiction, except this is nonfiction. So in this case, I was talking about the Rocky Mountains and the Wild West and how Colorado Springs and Denver and Creston, Wyoming, were these old West towns, and these people were coming, on trains, braving, dry weather in India. I mean, like just blazing hot weather in the summer, and danger of the Indian threat, things like that. All that stuff is drama, but it's real, right? So drama and setting location, all these things. So yes, in the nonfiction, I think you do have to sort of set that stage and talk about. It's not world building because you're not building a new world. You're just describing the world that already existed at the time, the real world. In this case, it happened to be the Wild West, and so that was the backdrop for this eclipse of 1878, when America was, kind of at least the West where it occurred was the Wild West, right? That's the world building for that nonfiction book that I tried to create or recreate.
And then on top of that, though, but you talk about the Wild West, right? There's a lot of romanticized versions of the Wild West. So you're also, as a historian, setting the record a little more straight with the research you found, or at least as straight as you can, right? Because not every record is perfect, right?
Yeah.
So can you kind of differentiate, I guess, what that looks like compared to what most people think of world building, or what most people think a historian does?
You mean, so separate what?
Like the idea that so we talked about how it's not really world building, right? You're pulling from historical record.
Yeah, sure.
But there is like the myths and the lore and the stuff behind it, right?
Right.
So how do you separate that out when it comes to putting together kind of the nonfiction stuff?
I don't know if I do, honestly. I mean, you don't want to make stuff up as a historian. If you start crossing that bridge, then you've lost your audience, right? As opposed to fiction, where they expect you to make stuff up. And I suppose that's kind of what we'll talk about later with my historical fiction. But I guess I'm careful not to make stuff up when I write history, but people will sort of fill in the gaps on what, say, if it's the West, right? People have this imagination of cowboys and Indians, for better or for worse, right? Things like that, railroads and mountains and dusty roads and people traveling by wagons. It's not my job to, unless there's something inaccurate about that relates to the story I'm telling as a historian, it's not my job to sort of try to correct that in advance. So I just sort of tell the story as I know it. I stick to the facts as well as I know it. I do try to describe, like, let's say I talked about all the people coming to Colorado Springs, which is this tiny little town at the point. We happen to be in Colorado Springs right now. It's a city of, it's over 500,000 people. When it was founded in 1871, in 1878, 7 years later, when this eclipse came, there were a few thousand people, right? Maybe 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. A couple hotels, dusty streets, clapboard houses, and all these tourists started to come, and you couldn't VRBO in advance or anything, right? So they're sleeping in the streets, sleeping on billiard tables, they're renting out the stalls of horses to have people sleep. That's the stuff I know, and so that's the picture I'll paint. Anything beyond that, I figure it's just up to the reader to, they can fill in the gaps or not on what they imagine the Wild West to be. But you could go on forever correcting, what's not true about the past when it comes to history. But that would get tedious, I would think. So, which is why fiction is kind of the opposite, because you can make up all the things that aren't true, and that's all part of the
and then break
fun.
all the things that you decide that you don't want anymore.
Yeah.
What struck me when I read The Great Eclipse was how you had this sort of alchemy, which is a fun word for you specifically, which we'll probably touch on later, of the nonfiction, but it read very much like a story. Yeah. You did a really good job of integrating it such that it didn't read like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. It was much more than just a list of facts.
Yeah.
Part of that for me, it was great. Part of that for me came from your integration of things like, journal entries or newspaper articles and those kinds of things. Do you have tips for people writing nonfiction who want to make it a little more lively or a little more colorful and engaging for readers?
For our audio listeners, Steve is currently having biological difficulties, and he'll return here in a minute. For those of you watching the video, you can see us working through it in the background. And now enjoy.
I think I'm good.
Okay.
Okay. Where was I? like right about here. Yeah. So okay. So
He's not gonna cut that. Maybe he likes
thanks. Well, maybe if you have time to fill, but
Yeah.
yes, this happens sometimes.
Maybe he likes you more than
Throat
me.
dries out and stuff.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a historian.
Writing nonfiction and making it interesting, is I think a lot like fiction. If I'm a character-driven fiction writer, and I think when it comes to history, nonfiction, people love, whether they know it or not, people are drawn in by those people of the past. Right? I mean, readers are drawn in by historical characters just as much as they are by fictional characters. And so the diaries, the accounts in newspapers of all the people, say, sleeping on billiard tables, or how Maria Mitchell, for example, who is an astronomer who came out to Denver in 1878 with a cadre of all her female students. It was like the first all-female Eclipse expedition in history, as far as we know. Things like that. People like that stuff, and I think it's just a lot like I said, like fiction. They're drawn to the characters. They follow along because in history they follow along because they're interested in Isaac Newton or Theodore Roosevelt or whatever, and how they maybe accomplished something, or whatever they did. So I guess I'm saying that history, I think, is as much character driven as fiction, and if it's to make it interesting, people want to follow other people through the past because they're empathizing. They're saying, oh, that's what it would have been like to live like this. I mean, I think it's sort of projection. You're living, trying to put yourself in their shoes, and people love that, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. That's been my experience. So I guess that if the first Great Eclipse was interesting in that regard, I think it's like you said, because I tried to make the people who were there as interesting as possible by using their own words and that sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I thought it was great. That brings us to one of the main things that we're really excited to have you here for, is to talk about research, because this applies to nonfiction and fiction writers, but primarily where would one go to find those kinds of resources?
Right.
Because for me, I wouldn't off the top of my head know where to go find journal entries from the 1800s.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I write historical fiction, like you said, and I know we'll be talking about that, and it's parts of it are very research heavy in the sense that I have these sort of dual timelines, right, where I have a fiction, a sort of a present day and a past. And my past, my reviewers seem to really like the heavy history that I put in. And I consider it heavy because at first I thought I was doing too much, but then you read some of my reviews and they're like, oh, we really like, this history. We don't know if it's real or not. So having that research background that I have, I think helps. And so I guess to answer your question, you can find research everywhere, right? I mean, when I started doing my PhD back in the 1990s, we didn't have the internet like we do now, right? I didn't have Google Books or, most journals, right? If you wanted to get an academic journal, you had to go to the stacks, to the shelves and pull them off. Now you can go online and use JSTOR or whatever and get academic journals. You can search the New York Times, which goes back to the 19th century, or even like the Denver Post, or Chicago Tribune. All those archives are available. You often have to pay, which kind of sucks. So it depends on what sort of research you want to do, but the internet makes it really, really easy. Not everything is online. Lots of things have been digitized, but so if you wanted to write, say, a historical thriller set in Scotland in the 17th century, that might be a little tough, and you might have to actually go to some of the archives, but you could probably get a lot through, digitized archives of newspapers and things like that. So, I mean, it's a really broad question. The short answer is you go first. I use Wikipedia all the time, which is not good if you're an academic historian. It's great if you're writing fiction, because even if it's wrong, at least it kind of points you in the right direction. And a lot of Wikipedia is wrong, or at least it's not always 100% right.
Right.
And so you have to kind of read between the lines.
Right.
So yeah, research. So if you're writing historical fiction, research is a big piece of it.
What kind of primary sources would you recommend people look for, other than the newspapers and journal entries that we've talked about? Are there other things that maybe we would overlook or not consider that you would recommend?
I think it sort of depends on your time period, right? If you're doing the Middle Ages, that's trickier than, say, the 19th century, where you have an abundance of scanned newspapers. So I think, speaking broadly, well, you have to answer that question: what period am I writing in? I think of Diana Galanon, who writes, what Scotland in what is she? It's like the 16th century, 17th. Actually, I think it's 17th, 18th, somewhere in there. You would.
And World War II.
Yeah, that's right. And World War II. So the World War II piece, right? That's probably a heck of a lot easier because so much. There are print. You could go to diaries. You can go to books. You can go to newspaper accounts. Something like the Second World War is heavily documented. So primary resources are easy to come by because we've got newspapers, letters, telegrams. It was in London a few weeks ago, and I was at the Churchill War Rooms. So much stuff there, right? Because Britain and William Churchill's underground bunker, they kept all these records. So that stuff's there. Going back, if you wanted to write, Viking history, you don't have quite as many resources. I wouldn't even know where to start there, but you can start. You'd probably figure out, okay, what archive in the world has a great collection of Viking runes and artifacts, right? And then maybe contact them. But I guess so maybe the way to answer your question before I drag this out too much longer is, what's your topic? And then try to identify the depositories or archives that might have a source of those materials, and then go there. Email, check online, whatever.
Is there a specific contact or person or route that someone should go through if they're trying to contact a professional in that field?
Yes, always. Any place like that will have an archivist or a curator. And archivists love to be helpful because it's what they live for. I found if you're kind, send a nice email, this is what I'm looking for. They will almost always respond. It sometimes takes a little while because they're always underpaid.
Right.
Most librarians and academics and that sort of thing are, or I should say underfunded. I don't know if they're usually not paid all that well. But I've found I have great luck if I reach out to an archivist, and it's usually by email. Sometimes I will call if there's a number, but often I don't expect to get them and I leave a message. But, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm looking at this. I see you have a collection of letters from this botanist who was in India, with the British Empire at such and such time. Are there scans available? You can start with there. Oh, well, I'm interested in what they might, say you're writing a romance about, two lovers in far off India during, and their, British East India Company or something. I was looking, could I get scans of these letters? How much would it cost? Usually if you're polite, they're polite back and they're more than happy to help. It sometimes just takes a while.
So even if you're writing fiction, I have always been hesitant personally to reach out and say, hey, I'm writing this fantasy novel, but I have great interest in this real world thing. Just do it.
Yeah. I would. Because they usually think that stuff's pretty cool. And yeah, even if you're not writing, say, proper history, if you say, I'm trying to base some characters on, I've got this guy who's a botanist and he falls in love with this woman who's a class above him and he's trying to impress her with, his whatever he finds in the wilds of the Himalaya or something.
Here, have this plant.
Could I look at his letters or we're totally spitballing here, people.
No,
but yeah, and archivists are more often than not just happy to help, whether it's fiction or not, because you can always say thanks so much, I'll put you in my acknowledgments, and they usually get a kick out of that.
Awesome.
So,
pro tips.
I'm still waiting on the next installment of Steve's historical thrillers, now with romance from India, British East.
Yeah, is that going to appear
British
in your
East
next
India Trading Company.
Trina Piper novel?
No, it'll be written under
series.
Rusty Stevens.
Yes, under a pen name. We're waiting. We're ready.
But
I've got to work in hockey because, right? Isn't hockey?
Yeah, that's the thing.
You have to have hockey.
You don't want to follow Thacker down that road. It's no. Hockey's the big one right now. I think that's why he's.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that there was hockey in early 19th century.
No, you need to pick
Calcutta.
on cricket. You need to start a niche.
Ice cricket. See, that's how hockey began. It was cricket, and they had this frozen pond, and we all know this.
Yeah.
So we just want to go to the very beginnings of the original ice hockey romance, which was frozen cricket.
And obviously, because
India.
a PhD in
an
history
outpost
said it's totally true.
The Himalaya.
Yeah. Completely true.
One of the things that I love, though, and you've encountered this with your reviews, that people enjoy the historical components. And I think that that's because people enjoy feeling as though they're learning something while they're reading even fiction. So if you go back and you look through Isaac Newton's life and some of the things that he did, the parallels that you've set up in your Trina Piper novels, which we'll talk about a little later probably, are such that you can see actual things that he did and you come up with this alternate reason or this ulterior motive, but you're still getting a lot of true facts. And that's a really attractive prospect for a lot of readers.
It appears to be. Hell, let's just talk about it now. I mean,
okay.
So here's the thing. So yeah, I have this series called the Trina Piper thrillers, right? And they're about a historian in the present day who uncovers these secrets in the past, kind of, Dan Brown, Steve Berry, James Rollins type stuff. And so my first book is called, obviously, The Newton Cipher, and it involves Isaac Newton. And yes, because I did do a lot with Isaac Newton as an academic, or at least I studied him a lot. I knew, I knew the general outline of his life and his major experiments and what he was famous for, and kind of the highlights, right? And lowlights, because Newton was a bit wacky.
Which we love to learn, and
yes,
we wouldn't
right.
know from middle school history.
Right.
We learned that from.
Yeah, I mean, and you learn all these fun, quirky things, and you learn a lot about, late 17th century London and the plague and the fire of London and all that stuff. So I worked all that in. And because it was my first historical thriller, I put a lot in because it's what I knew. So I have these dual timelines where there's the Newton piece, and about every, I'll do like 3 or 4 chapters of the present day, and then I'll drop back into the past. And so these dual timelines, which is a thing that I've only recently learned about, that this is called, it's a sort of a genre of dual timeline, romance or thrillers or whatever. I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. I just sort of did it. But I started to get nervous because eventually I was thinking, am I doing too much? I was working too hard to make this stuff accurate, except for the fictional pieces, because there's a mystery and magic and that sort of stuff, and obviously that's not real, or that wasn't part of the actual past. But anyway, I did the first book, and what I did realize, like you said, is so the reviewers, I actually tried to pull back a little bit because I thought I was getting boring with all the details. Turns out people really liked it. And what I didn't do in the Newton Cipher was, which you see in a lot of, like I just read Douglas Preston book called Extinction, right? Which is about how they it's kind of like Jurassic Park. It's basically a Jurassic Park riff in a way. They brought back Neanderthals and mammoths and stuff. It was pretty good because it's Douglas Preston. It's a nice, Douglas Preston's a master, right? And they always do these historical afterwards, or these afterwards about what's real, what science is real, what history is real. And I didn't do that with Newton Cipher, and people were kind of like, we'd like to know more about it. So the second book, Scepter of the Sun King, which is in Paris with the time of Louis XIV, that's the past. And then the present is, they're solving this problem that was left over, centuries later. I did do a historical afterwards, and people the readers really responded well to that. And they said, we really like the history. How much of it's real and how much isn't? We can't tell, or I can't tell. Those are some of the most positive reviews. So what I thought was a little pedantic and boring turned out, in this case, to be what readers really like. So I'm I guess leaning into that. I always think that's kind of a goofy phrase, but I'm going to keep doing that because I was kind of backing off, thinking I don't want to sound like a boring historian, because really it's a thriller. I want to keep up the pace, and I didn't want to bog it down in history. But it turns out that in this sort of particular niche, people really like it. So give the readers what they want, right? That sells copies.
I really like it. I love those books.
Yeah, and so now I'm gonna, I almost might go back and do a historical afterword for the Newton Cipher because people were asking for it.
You can just do like a small little booklet for that too.
Post it on your website.
Yeah, I was thinking about just some sort of bonus content, for newsletter subscribers or something. Go ahead.
Well, no, because kind of before we leave this particular piece of it, then now that you're doing these historical afterwards, how much does that drive keeping things a little bit more accurate, and then finding small ways to introduce? Because if we talk about we're calling it kind of old history, historical fiction. You've added magic into what would be what most people know is Dan Brown's Robert Langdon, right? Like, imagine if he had magic, kind of thing. Yeah. You've added that little twist. So how does that keep you trying to keep things more historically accurate, or does that mean now that you kind of want to lean away from it?
No, I know what you mean. I try with the history piece, with the history timeline part. I try to keep it as accurate as possible, really down to the day if necessary. until I need something changed to make it fictional and exciting, because they all have a mystery, and there's some sort of secret power that's left behind, and they're finding all these artifacts that were imbued with power. That's kind of how it works. Obviously, that didn't really happen. So I try to keep it as accurate as possible. And that's kind of what makes it fun, because then if you can say, it's a secret history type of approach, right? There's a secret history behind stuff, and that's what Da Vinci Code is, and that's what Steve Berry does and James Rollins. There's these hidden histories that you don't see until it's revealed in this sort of this mystery that your protagonist has to solve. So it's fun. You want to keep it as accurate as you want to keep to the proper historical timeline, what's known in the historical record, until it makes sense not to. Gotcha. And that's just where I suppose the fiction writer's craft or instinct has to come in, and you just say, all right, here is where I'm making this plot twist or whatever. But I think it's more believable if you tie it into the history that people know. Absolutely. And that's why your history should be, it's helpful if it's bigger names, or at least names that are well enough known, like Isaac Newton or Louis XIV, because then there's already an established history. And even if readers don't know all the dates and details, they at least have a sense that this person was real, these things happened, and then you kind of say, but it happened because, there was this mystery back here that they were hiding, or they had this powerful object that they were using and abusing,
Is that a double-edged sword? So if you create fake historical characters, or your own fictional characters that lived the same time period as big names,
right?
Does that give you more leeway to be inaccurate? Is there the risk of having inaccuracies be more dangerous if you're using more well-known figures?
It's probably, actually, that's a great question. I think what you don't want to do, or you want to be careful with, changing the facts of the well-known figures. But that's where those made-up characters who were there at the same time can be useful, because they didn't really exist, and you can kill them off or whatever you need to do, right? Because that these were not these. That's where you can insert the sort of secret history bits, or the things that didn't really happen, because these characters and people weren't really there at the time, right? So like in the Newton cipher, I remember now I had this one, it was Newton lived at the time of the plague and also the Great Fire of London, and I had, well, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but I guess I probably don't have a lot of readers so much as
it's really good.
Well, one of the secrets is there's alchemy. Newton was obsessed with alchemy, the real Newton. Mm-hmm. I just have alchemy being sort of a real viable magical force in these books, right? And so I had someone creating sort of kind of not zombies, but sort of alchemical golems, right? Mm. I have this one, I forget what they're called, not a gravedigger, but someone who's going around collecting the bodies of plague victims around London, and he gets killed by a golem. And just as one chapter, right? So that illustrates the whole point, that there was these magical golems going around London that were sort of beset on London by England's enemies, an alchemical wizard from Holland. But this guy he was killed, and he was collecting bodies, and he disappeared. So he didn't really exist, and obviously magical alchemical golems didn't exist. But I made him up, and it illustrated the point without disrupting any facts of, say, the Great Fire of London, or Isaac Newton, or, King Charles II, whatever.
So I'm gonna get real nerdy with the time stuff. And I think we talked about this a little bit with Kevin Eikenberry, because we discussed a bit of his alt history as well.
Alternate. Just similar.
Yep.
Yeah, very kind of similar stuff, but kind of the Marvel / Doctor Who problem of time, like messing with events and time. Do you then, like, if you know that you're going to change something, do you then think through possible branch factors, sort of like the butterfly effect of what that's going to have? How would that affect especially because you jump between history and now?
Right, I know what you mean. I guess I don't try to make my changes that big, because you're right. If you wanted to do sort of a butterfly effect thing, you could. That could be fun. That's not my focus. I try to keep at least with this particular series, history is the way it is. It's just there's a reason why certain things are happening that are hidden, right?
Yep.
So if I were, I guess the short answer is I don't permit any crazy things to happen. That could, right? You could have, one little thing could totally change timelines. I just say they don't. Because I want the history to be, I don't want history to have been changed. I just want it to have happened for reasons that we don't always realize.
Yeah.
Of course, there is magic, so that just kind of, throws the true history timeline out the window. Yeah. But I still have, in my world, history is as it has been. They're just figuring out why certain things have been changed.
A lot of me dragging that out is, it's a perfectly valid technique, right? A lot of people think that if you're going to mess with time or events in history, like, you need to plot out like every possible branch, every possible effect. Ugh. Only if it actually only if you're trying to incorporate it in the story, right? Like, now granted, you do a really good job of not significantly changing major events in the secret history piece.
Until he reaches the modern timeline.
Right.
And then he blows all kinds of things up.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. There are and it's a good point. I mean, you could, if you wanted to go that route, if an author wanted to go that route, they could. I just don't, and it's as simple as that. Because then that's just not what my goal is, for the series. Yeah. My goal is to have history is as it mostly was in the protagonist's present world, but then obviously magic's kind of bubbling up, right? So things get affected, but not like. Yeah. Nothing major. That just wouldn't work for the way I envision it. But Kevin Eikenberry did something kind of very different in that sense. But it's great too. So you can go with alternate history. You can go all kinds of directions. Or S.M. Sterling, he does just awesome stuff. And you can often just do that by branching off into separate timelines, where this timeline is totally different than the one that we live in. The real one or whatever, and then you just write that, and you can kind of go hog wild. You have Romans with tanks. Roman legions suddenly getting a hold of a battalion of panzers and figuring out how to work them and overrunning the Goths, or vice versa. I don't know.
Yeah. So. I would read that book. So when we were talking to you prepping this interview, you said to ask you about, I think I have it right, the Village Idiot's Guide to outlining.
The Village Idiot approach, and this is actually a kind of tie. I was just thinking about that when Shady asked his last question. So yes, I will talk about. So, and I think that is how I structure these. So, we're talking about using the facts of the past in the in the fictional world that you create. How do I do that? In this particular case, keeping my present, having sort of a magical secret history with this sort of actual facts and places and settings of our real world, and so I have this approach that I call the Village Idiot approach, which is based on this, and I don't know if you've heard of it because you do work in like Russian stuff, but it's like a Russian Russian fable. That I heard from someone else. I heard from another academic, because he was talking about the Village Idiot approach in his work. Historians aren't all stuffy and everything, but I looked it up, and it seems to be there's this real fable about this Russian prince, right? So there's this Russian prince. He's an amazing archer, right? And so good that he thinks he's the best. So he spent the best in Russia. So he spends this time, this year. He takes like a year, and he starts traveling around Russia to see if he can find anyone who is as good at archery as he is, and he engages anyone he can find. He goes to all the little towns and villages. No one can beat him in his accuracy, right? And so after a year, he's heading back to his father's kingdom, I guess, and he comes across this tiny little village that doesn't even appear on any maps. And he wanders in, and he's looking around, and there are these targets everywhere, and every single one of them has an arrow smack dab in the bullseye. And he's like, damn, maybe I finally met my match, This guy's amazing, whoever he is, or girl. So he goes into the little inn. The innkeeper's there, and he's like, I am Prince so-and-so, Ivan Ivanov. Who is your archer? I must meet him and compete with him. And the innkeeper's like, that's the Village Idiot. He's out back. And the prince is like, huh. So he goes out back, and there's this goofy guy with a bow, and he's like, I'm Prince Ivan whatever of off. I see you're quite good, and I must compete with you. Show me how. I mean, how is it that you can always? I mean, even he was kind of just confessed he was so impressed. He's like, I am the best archer in Russia. Even I don't hit the bullseye every single time. And the village idiot's, oh, it's easy. And he just takes his bow and he shoots it into a barn across the way, and then he takes a can of paint and he goes up and paints the target around. So we've all kind of heard this, right? But the point is, it's that the method here isn't that you're picking the target and trying to hit it. It's that you're choosing where you want to be, and then you paint your target around it.
Is he really the village idiot if he's figured out how to work smarter, not harder? For those of you keeping score, this is the second time something like that has come up. Katie Cross discussed throwaway lines and how you might end up painting a new plot point around that. So, I'll leave it up to you authors to figure out which way you want to work. We hope you enjoyed Steve discussing historical nonfiction and how it can also be character driven and you still have to world build a little bit around it, as well as getting into a little bit of his historical fiction and alternate history kind of takes on how best to really build out from there. Make sure you go to our show notes, check out our guests, and follow us wherever we are next and see what our new releases are. And again, we'll have Steve Ruskin back in 2 weeks, the Maned Historian Part 2. Don't worry, you'll get more of a kick out of him then too. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, thanks for helping us tear the worlds asunder. We'll see you next time.